Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We hope you get a lot of value out of this session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live with us here today or on demand at a later date. If you're new to the Spring 2 webinar series, this is a great place to learn about design thinking and how the power of design thinking can help you in your work and life. And if you're looking for more design thinking thought leadership, you can also check out our past webinars, our YouTube channel, or our blog. There's lots of great content there. On YouTube, you'll see we just wrapped up a new video series focused on the 5 phases of design thinking, so check that out. For those of you who are not familiar with Spring 2, we're a leading design thinking and innovation firm. We work with governments and businesses to help them increase revenue, deliver better services, create future-ready policies, and get the right products to market faster. We help our clients do this through coaching, consulting, and training. And if you're interested in learning more, please visit our website, shoot us an email, or message us on social media. In today's webinar, we're going to be discussing digital literacy in the public sector, specifically through the lens of design thinking and the Internet of Things, or the IoT, and how governments can become more impactful and govern more effectively when they improve digital literacy and embrace design thinking. You're going to learn things like what IoT is, how the IoT and design thinking tie into other emerging technologies like AI and 5G, and how to incorporate the IoT and design thinking duality into the public service innovation and policies.
Welcome, everyone. So as I was preparing for the webinar last week, I was deep in thought. And so my kids were wondering what I was thinking about. So I started talking about how I'm preparing for this webinar on IoT. And so they asked, well, what is IoT? And so I started talking about how it's the Internet of Things and how it's things that are connected to the internet, like the Nest that we have for our thermostat, like the smartphones that we have. And my youngest speaks up and says, like me. And so I said, not exactly, but we're getting pretty close to there. And so we're glad that you're joining us today. And we're going to talk a lot about IoT and design thinking and how they work really well together. Hi, my name is Nilofer Erdeval, and I'm CEO of Spring 2 Innovation. We specialize in innovation and design thinking for organizations, helping define and refine challenges so that they're easier to make decisions on and take actions from them. We do this in a human-centered way, looking at different perspectives and bringing different mind frames together.
Hi, my name is Walter Knittel. I'm CEO at Praxium. We provide consulting services in market and ecosystem research, commercialization, and business development, including a focus on the Internet of Things. Some of our work includes Canada's and regional ecosystem assessment with respect to IoT for FDI and export purposes. Looking forward to sharing my knowledge with you.
Now, let's have you share a little bit about yourselves. When did you first hear about IoT? Was it this year? Was it last year? Was it a lot longer, 2 or more years, or are you just finding out about it? Feel free to write in the chat. When did you first hear about IoT? As you guys are writing in the chat, I'm going to cover off the topics that we're going to talk about today in the webinar. We're going to talk about what is IoT and sort of set the scene. We're going to talk about benefits and pitfalls of IoT, navigating the IoT space, IoT as a systemic driver, design thinking, IoT design thinking, and the public service. Are you into smart cities, 5G, connected health, cybersecurity, connected transportation, or other digital and physical areas? Many people are involved in these areas, innovating or creating products, using them, or being concerned with their impacts. They all have something in common, and that's the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things, well, what is that?
Well, the Internet of Things, or IoT, is an extension of the Internet that now connects physical devices, or things, with people, computers, and applications that are already there. It's everywhere, from simple sensors to thermostats to cars and buildings. These things are gaining high level of computing power and makes them more intelligent and more autonomous. And they generate tsunamis of data from which value is created. In effect, the Internet of Things is animating our physical world, or virtually bringing to life the physical world around us. The result is a convergence between the social, enterprise, and the physical on a unified digital realm. So what? Why should we care? IoT is transformative. It changes the way we do things as individuals, as businesses. The economy changes, our society will change, and also consequently, government will have to change as well and keep up. As in any transformation, it brings benefits, but also with it some challenges. And in order to leverage the benefits and also mitigate the challenges, it's important that we step up and elevate our level of digital literacy. So what is digital literacy?
Let's pull back a little bit and talk about what is digital literacy. So Walter and I actually spent a lot of time a few years ago thinking about what digital literacy is. We even did some whiteboarding. And we concluded that IoT and design thinking play big parts in the digital literacy component of it. It's the knowing about the technology, understanding the people, and applying the technology. And so as you know and understand the technology, IoT literacy begins with the knowing of IoT and then understanding the things related to the digital world that include the data, AI, sensors, smart devices, and so much more. Things that can help us be more productive and safer if we know what they are, how to apply our knowledge about them, and use them properly. The key parts to understanding and applying appropriately are with design thinking. Both IoT and design thinking, the methodology and the mindset can be learned.
So what we'll cover next are some of the benefits of the Internet of Things as they apply generally in industry and society. For individuals like you and me, IoT means better health and fitness based on biometric and activity data that's gathered from wearables like the Fitbit, for example. Also, a connected smart home with smart thermostats, for example, can make our life more convenient, safer, and energy efficient by sensing our activity and adjusting our own home environment to our liking. In business, IoT underpins automation, which increases product and service quality and lowers operating costs through reduced human involvement. It enables faster and more reliable supply chains and reduces equipment and facility costs, and makes work a lot safer through smart clothing and potential hazard monitoring. For the economy, which is so dependent on infrastructures, IoT enables safer and more efficient movement of people and goods through connected and autonomous transportation. And it also underpins reliable energy distribution through electrical smart grids. It allows us to take advantage of diverse renewable energy sources, reducing our dependence on carbon. It will play a big role in the circular economy, which will reduce costs by recouping and recirculating materials and energy. Overall, IoT increases productivity, it creates digital economy jobs, and raises the GDP.
And there's more. Communities and society in general benefit from the Internet of Things as well. For example, IoT at the heart of smart cities enhances the quality of the citizens within that city through efficient mobility, greater safety and security, lower risk of infrastructure and utility failure, and more effective emergency response, which is more and more important. IoT elevates public health effectiveness, including earlier infection detection and pandemic mitigation, such as distancing monitoring, touchless automated interaction, and a plethora of connected medical devices for diagnosis, treatment, and care. Communities not just industry, are going to benefit from IoT's role in the circular economy, delivering a sustainable, clean environment and containing the climate crisis. IoT also has a role at all levels of government to improve service delivery, reduce costs and risks through asset management, monitor regulation compliance, maintain public health and safety, and other operational areas. And of course, it has a vital role and obligation to innovate digital governance around the Internet of Things itself.
Yes, there are benefits, but as we mentioned before, there are significant pitfalls as well. As with any disruption, IoT has a tug of war between the benefits and the challenges or pitfalls. IoT cybersecurity is undeniably a top-ranking concern. These things are computers and they are hackable to be physically malicious, such as releasing hazardous industrial gases or disrupting patients' IV drips, or even in your own home, disabling your sump pump. And things can also serve as platforms for launching botnet attacks. Privacy is another big concern. While wearing your things, our behavior is monitored and the data about us can be put to malicious or unwanted use. Unfortunately, today, digital governance around IoT cybersecurity and privacy is at its infancy. To avoid bodily harm or infrastructure or environmental damage, this is something we must address by design ahead of time instead of as an afterthought.
IoT also challenges the future of work with its fundamental role in automation, not only for labor, but also for cognitive and decision-making functions. Consequently, our human agency is going to be challenged, leading to diminished feelings of relevance and societal inclusion. And if this is left unaddressed, it could escalate to social and political turbulence we're already seeing. And IoT also contributes to possible erosion of cyber autonomy. Is it possible for us not to be connected? This is starting to get more and more difficult, and we don't even realize it.
So, as you've seen, some of the challenges and some of the benefits that are linked to IoT, you've seen in other types of technologies. In fact, many terms and many technologies and the concepts are linked to IoT. It seems like IoT is actually a big black hole that consumes everything around it. So when we think about IoT and we accept the fact that IoT is not any one thing, what is IoT? Well, IoT is a paradigm. It's a space. And as a space, it has dimensions. One of the dimensions is the architecture dimension. It's all about the structure and the bits and pieces that make it up. Things like the devices, the network, analytics, and applications. But these things alone don't create value. The value is created in the verticals or the solutions enabled by IoT. So things like smart buildings, autonomous vehicles, industrial control, wearables, and health. And of course, none of these would be possible without a number of, actually many, enabling technologies and disciplines. So things like hardware and software innovation, new business models that come up as a result of IoT, security and privacy, which we already mentioned. And of course, IoT itself has impact on other disciplines. It has impact on law, it has impact on our socioeconomics, and of course, very importantly, it has impact on digital governance that we innovate. We've heard all of these terms before, shown here. In fact, some of them have the same benefits and challenges as IoT, as we already mentioned. They all overlap IoT space and create a higher level systems solutions perspective role for IoT. So as you can see, IoT is a huge space and definitely goes way beyond its initial narrow notion of connected devices. It not only drives innovation in individual areas, but also systemic innovation in putting them together like Lego pieces into a solution. Consequently, it also compels systemic digital governance to ensure we get the most out of IoT and can also mitigate IoT's adverse effects.
So how do we move forward? IoT demands digital governance, and the systemic nature of tech, and especially IoT, requires systematic governance. Design thinking is ideal to do this well because there's a highly complex problem, and design thinking is really great for solving these highly complex problems that require a number of organizations, groups of people, and different priorities, and it helps pull them together and align them. Systematic digital innovation is also optimized using design thinking. So systematic digital innovation interplays with systemic digital governance. That's a lot of words. Any product, service, or policy is only useful to the extent that it serves its customers, the citizens, most of the time. Consequently, understanding citizens' real needs and aspirations is critical before embarking on solutions or policies. Next, the solution or policy creators need to start from a position of strength in digital literacy with enough in-depth and scope. It's important to be literate in IoT as a digital space that also includes world physicality and not just the enterprise and social aspects. And lastly, it's important to use effective innovation techniques such as design thinking to ensure the created products and policies meet customers' and citizens' needs and aspirations. So what is design thinking? A lot of people might be familiar with design thinking in its 5 phases. So starting out with the empathize phase, it's putting yourself in the end user's shoes. And so what are they thinking? What are their challenges? What are their measures of success, expectations, before moving into defining what that challenge is? And so what's the real problem we need to solve for those end users? And then third, then hopping into the ideation phase. And so what are possible solutions that we could provide for the challenge that we've identified? And then moving on to the prototyping and testing. And so what could solutions look like, and having multiple options for them in the prototype phase, and then testing them out. So what do users think about the solutions? Design thinking is a mindset, methodology, and process for innovating products and services with end clients' needs and aspirations at the heart of it. Whether it's commercial customers, citizens served by government, or internal roles in any organization. It's about empathizing with end clients' challenges from their perspective and working with them to clearly define their problem, co-create solutions, and test solutions options. It's a mental model for decision-making and a roadmap to innovation based on real problem definitions. So if we pull back, design thinking isn't a linear process. It could be iterative at any point, and it's about not jumping into ideation mode right away, as we often do in large organizations. It's about pulling back and thinking about, well, what's the challenge that we actually want to solve? And even before that, who are the people that are involved in the challenge? Once we understand them, then moving on to defining the challenge, coming up with ideas, prototyping, and testing. And so making sure that we're understanding the users and bringing them along, co-creating with them as we even test out the solutions. So with design thinking, digital literacy through design thinking involves understanding. And so understanding from that end user's perspective, what are their challenges that we would want solved through the use of digital and especially IoT, and how can we apply it? And so co-creating things with our end users. There's also an opportunity to apply design thinking to governance, especially in the prototyping and testing realm. And yes, governance can be prototyped and tested, at least in most aspects of it. And so keeping that mindset in mind of prototyping and testing governance for IoT with the end clients. So as we're thinking about supporting policy topics, you might want to consider how can government support research and innovation in IoT ecosystem? How can government stimulate demand for IoT to be adopted more widely, like through the use of IoT in delivery of public services? How can we strengthen conditions for development and adoption of IoT as a systematic innovation, while at the same time mitigating risks of pervasive IoT? IoT requires wide-ranging areas to consider and requires an active, multi-perspective approach. To shape IoT, we need to look at both business needs and informed public preferences. So let's touch on a few of these. So when we're looking at supporting research and innovation in an IoT ecosystem, taking a look at the non-technical factors driving the adoption. So what steps can be taken by policy communities to create opportunities for effective collaborative networks involving citizens, industry, academia, and government? How can we share knowledge amongst and with previous projects? So how can public sector and industry systematically recognize IoT related projects and capture lessons learned, starting with those that are funded by government? And how can we stimulate the demand for IoT to be adopted? And so what opportunities are there for IoT technology for delivering public services to increase usage and demand? And how can the policy community support the use of IoT technologies for infrastructure projects? We need to consistently consider the people that are involved in IoT. And so in design thinking, we use something called personas to group the end clients together based on their behaviors. So personas are about understanding people using the technology or the policy. And so these personas could involve for businesses, those that are using IoT, those that are developing IoT, and those that aren't using IoT. For citizens, it could be those using IoT services and not using IoT services. And then from a policy perspective, taking a look at all of the partners, especially from a government perspective, federal, provincial, and municipal, working all together. I'm gonna get you guys to do a quick activity with me. And so I want you to grab a piece of paper that's nearby and a pen. And I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to come up with as many words as you can with this structure. And so 4 blank spaces, the letter I, and then 2 blank spaces. And so do this on your own to try to come up with as many words as you can in the next 25 seconds on the number of words that you can get using this structure. And just to give you guys a clue, the first time I did it, I came up with only 1 within a minute. So give you guys another 15 more seconds to try to come up with as many words as you can with this structure. Blank, 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 I, blank, blank. Okay, so hopefully you've got that. And so next thing I'm going to get you guys to do is also on that blank piece of paper, I want you to come up with as many words as you can in the next 30 seconds with this structure. So blank, 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 ing. I'm going to give you guys another 25 seconds to come up with as many words as you can with this structure. Some of you guys might be finding it a little bit easier than the first one. If not, that's okay, because when I did it for the first time, I had a minute and I came up with 3. So it's completely different part of our brain that we're using for this. I'll give you guys another 5 more seconds. How many words can you come up using this structure? So if you guys don't mind writing in the chat, were you able to come up with more words the second time around? And so what we've done with this is it's very similar to the environment that we're working in. There's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of unknowns, and we might know one thing in that area. But as we learn about the technology and the people around us, the more blanks that we can fill in and reduce the amount of ambiguity that we have. And so as we increase the clarity, it's actually easier to see more options that are available to us. And when we think of this in an IoT perspective, the more we know, the easier for us it is to figure out what those challenges are and to look at options for solving those challenges.
Great. So we learned a lot about IoT so far, its pitfalls and its challenges. So how does IoT impact the public service, and where does the design thinking come in? All levels of governments have key departments as well as programs and initiatives where IoT plays. It could be the public policy that IoT compels, or the delivery of services that IoT enables, or just using IoT in the physical operation of government. As a result, the public service will increasingly have to deal with IoT and therefore have to elevate their digital literacy around it. We'll briefly touch on some key areas where IoT plays, and also design thinking has an important role. Infrastructure is one of the main concerns of government. The federal government recently announced major programs to improve the Canadian infrastructure, in part as a vehicle for economic recovery from the pandemic. Infrastructure is also a key focus for municipalities, as expressed by FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. IoT, in this context, provides a mechanism for sensing and gathering information about the infrastructure, such as ambient light levels, sewage levels, or even sensors that are embedded within the concrete of the roads and bridges to detect the loading and usage of the infrastructure, and also continuously monitor the integrity of the concrete itself. Of course, IoT also analyzes the collected data and responds or acts back upon the infrastructure, such as turning on the lights or off, or closing gates or opening gates to different roadways. All of this involves people and impacts people. That's where design thinking comes in. Design thinking is critical for empathizing with citizens to discover their problems and define their real needs, how they will use the infrastructure, and their need for privacy and security while doing it. It plays a big role in innovating the actual technical solutions as well, and the governance that goes around it. Public transit is another key concern of government, both in recent federal announcements as well as key focus areas for municipalities. Again, IoT plays a huge role in many aspects. For example, in vehicle electrification, enabling and monitoring charging stations, positive train control for rail safety, traffic management, and many other areas. Design thinking, again, has a role, again, in soliciting and eliciting citizens' needs. For example, Ottawa's LRT would benefit from design thinking, both for understanding rider needs and usage, and operational needs such as designing in the right level of sensing to monitor and predict train failures. Public health has become prominent due to the pandemic, with Public Health Agency Canada playing a primary role. This also understandably is a key focus for municipalities. And it's also not just about health, but general safety as well. IoT, again, has an important role. As already mentioned, it supports COVID mitigation by proximity sensing and touchless operation. Design thinking, as you might guess, also plays big. It is critical for understanding how citizens would participate in public health measures such as physical distancing or COVID alerts apps, or if they have any hesitancy or objection to it. Housing is another focus area for municipalities and also for the federal government. Again, IoT plays a big role in in supporting, enabling smart buildings and homes, making them more energy efficient and more sustainable, and of course, lowering their operating costs. Design thinking is important in ensuring that homes are adapted to how people will actually use it, and also designing it in a way that people can easily adapt to the new technology. We all know that the climate crisis is upon us. The federal government recently made a significant proclamation of their climate plan, which is a step up from previous attempts, that's for sure. And it's the same for the municipalities. Climate and sustainability is one of the key focus areas. The success of the climate plan will depend on many factors, including the application of IoT. IoT in this context is used for sensing the physical environment, monitoring air and temperature or any other types of hazards. It's used for process automation, ensuring to minimize or reducing the amount of intake of raw materials from the earth. And also, IoT is a key component of the circular economy, as we already mentioned before. The design thinking also is key here. For example, it's important to understand how people think about the climate plan or climate change in general, how they will participate in it, and use any public measures around it. The federal government is placing a great value on innovation in some very key areas. It's partly realized through the several supercluster initiatives. All of them have some level of overlap with the Internet of Things. The most relevant, however, are these three: the digital technology supercluster, the artificial intelligence supercluster, and next-gen manufacturing supercluster. IoT is one of the common threads in these. It should be leveraged to provide a systemic perspective for innovation activities within them and help to de-silo some of the efforts. And design thinking plays a role here as well. It's there to support systemic exploration and innovation involving the supercluster specialties. I'm sure that some of you have recently heard of ITOT Integration. Information technology, or IT, has been with us for a long time, but so has operation technologies. With the digitalization of the physical world, i.e. the IoT, there's increasing motivation to integrate IT with OT. IT-OT integration is a broad topic in its own right, but it is also applied to government in several ways. First, in the federal and the provincial facilities, IoT plays a role in the OT and IoT integration. Second, at the municipal level, within individual operational areas, IoT plays a role, again, in the IT-OT integration. And certainly in the smart city initiatives as well. When you really look at it, a smart city is an exercise in IT-OT integration at the technology level. Of course, social needs are also a key pillar of any smart city. Here, design thinking plays a role, again, to elicit citizen and employee needs when we get into IT-OT integration. Now, we've said a lot about benefits and pitfalls. And if you look around, there are some learnings on that from the industry and from the North American jurisdictions. Here are just the two examples, Portland and Toronto. Portland just canceled an effort of creating a smart city. And Toronto, as you may know, also canceled the Sidewalk Labs initiative at Quayside. Both of these, the replica and the sidewalk labs, are part of the overall Google family under the Alphabet umbrella. Issues relating to cancellations include citizen needs and diversity and transparency, who owns the data and the privacy issues around that, and also technology companies, the sidewalk labs and replica, they also express the lack of a business case ultimately. In retrospect, it boils down to a gap in digital literacy and also a gap in understanding citizens' real needs. And this is where it's an example of how an elevated digital literacy can help resolve some of these issues and make these projects more successful.
Yeah, Walter, I remember you and I having a lot of conversations about sidewalk labs as it was going forward. And so how do we avoid the pitfalls and issues that we're seeing in some of these deployments that have been canceled? And so to avoid those pitfalls and issues, you need to start from a position of strength, and that's digital literacy. So knowing and understanding IoT and understanding the people involved and using it through design thinking. So combining both of those to get the digital literacy. And these are both things that can be learned. So the bottom line is IoT is here and now, and we're firmly planted in the Internet of Things era. Whether you realize it or not, it's all around us. And it's important to know it, understand it, and use it to leverage its benefits and avoid those pitfalls. It's not any single technology, solution, or sector, but a new way of working and living. And it's a big driver of innovation in technology and in business.
But as you've seen, we have to ensure that as a civilization, we need to preserve our security, privacy, and human agency. To achieve this, policymakers must elevate their digital literacy and technological intuition around IoT and have the right innovation tools and mindset, such as through design thinking, to innovate the digital governance compelled by IoT. The bottom line, the Internet of Things is a mindset, how to build our world, relate to it, and also to each other.
If you want to find out more information on digital literacy through IoT and design thinking, check out the website. We're going to open it up for Q&A now. And so I know some of you guys have been gathering up those questions. And so feel free to ask in the chat or yeah, so Jessica just put in a comment in there for if you guys want to ask a question, feel free to do so in the chat and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Oh, actually in the Q&A section too. So there's one.
So
yeah.
we do have a few questions that came in. The first one was, do either of you have an example of how we can improve government funding around IoT?
Walter, I might give that to you to start off.
I think it's a question of education, really. Government has put out a lot of initiatives. However, government is not always aware of the latest technologies and latest industry thrust. It's a matter of getting in there and talking to them and educating them on what's happening, such as Internet of Things, for example, and the important impacts that it has on all of us.
I would add that you want to think about what you're trying to encourage. And so if you're trying to get more businesses doing IoT, then put the funding towards that, and also purchasing Canadian or whatever your government's products are, like not from the government itself, but from the citizens. And then for internal adoption of IoT as well. And as Walter mentioned, IT and OT, the operational technology together, are a really great start for any organization within the government, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal. I hope that helped.
Well, I'm sure we'll find out in the chat if it was not helpful.
Keep asking away.
We had some people were asking, this is more a question for me, I think. Some people were asking if we're going to provide all the links that we were dropping in the chat. We will. When you get the on-demand recording next week, we'll make sure that you have all the links, all the resources that we talked about today will be there, because I know we covered a lot of information, and Walter and Nilofer have written a lot of really helpful blogs and videos and articles on a lot of these topics to dive a little deeper. So we'll send those to you all next week when you get the link. Now we have another question here asking if you could elaborate on the connection between IoT and 5G specifically. So Walter, I think that's probably for you.
Right. As you probably gathered, IoT is a conglomeration of a number of technologies, and that includes a whole plethora of networking technologies. That includes Ethernet and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you name it. 5G is a public infrastructure type of technology, so just like 4G and 3G was. The important thing about 5G is that it was actually developed with IoT in mind. And what that really means is there are features in 5G that enable real-time operation of devices. So what that means is that the latency and the speed at which data travels the latency is shorter, but the speed is higher. The cloud or the edge devices can react to device information very quickly. Also, very importantly, 5G has built-in capability to support many, many devices in a square area. So for example, one of the specs that they designed the 5G around is to be able to support 1 million devices in a square kilometer. So if you think about that, Neil actually reminded me what that means is that it's a device in every square meter of area. So in your own room, you might have 12 or 15 square meters. So you could have 12 or 15 devices supported just by 5G, let alone other technologies. So 5G is very, very key to bring massive IoT to fruition in the public space.
Yeah, and we forget how prevalent, some of us don't even realize that IoT is there and where it is. And so anything that has sensors has the potential to be IoT. And when we even think about things like our vehicles, the vehicles that they're coming out with, there's so much IoT on there that could really benefit from 5G being in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions. We still have time for a few more. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box or the Q&A function. I'm keeping an eye on both right now. We have one. I think this is probably for you as well, Walter. What lessons were learned from the Quayside failure in terms of the application of design thinking? Oh no, this is for Nil. In terms of the application for design thinking.
It might be a little bit of both. And so it's really cool what they were doing there. They did actually bring in aspects of design thinking in terms of understanding their citizens. I know they did some really cool work in terms of getting citizens to journal and put their thoughts around the implementation of what they're trying to create and of IoT too. I think some of the challenge was around putting some boundaries around data and who owned that data, and how much data was going to be produced as well too. IoT can be anywhere, so including like sensors within roads, within sidewalks themselves. And so based on time of day and other factors in there, there was some fears around whether or not they'd be able to specify who it was within the area that they were trying to develop. And so I think from a design thinking perspective, if they'd applied it a little bit earlier to the data component of it, I think that would have helped out a lot. And in terms of making some of those concerns public and then addressing them publicly. Walter?
Yes, I'll agree with that. I should also kind of mention that through that whole process that they did take some action to try to mitigate some of the concerns about privacy. And one thing that they came up was a set of stickers you can put around places to show you, well, here's a Wi-Fi and it's gathering this type of information, or here's a trash can that monitors what's being put in and things like that. So there's a whole plethora of stickers, sort of like road signs that you see when you're traveling down the road that people would have to learn. So I think, whether this is practical or not, my opinion is not. That design thinking would probably also help in trying to rationalize some of these stickers and minimize them and make them more useful and more intuitive.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question, I think, for both of you. What are some key capabilities that one would look for in resources when building a new team to start innovating, IoT and design thinking, et cetera? So what are some of the key capabilities that people should be looking for?
I can start with this one. I could probably spend days, if not weeks, talking about this. It's an area that I'm super passionate about too. And so anytime an organization is looking to start an innovation team or an innovation center facility, having started a few, I think I would consider what the outcome you're trying to achieve is and focus in on that as one of the key drivers. And in terms of resources, having a mix type of personalities and people with different backgrounds really helps out. And so making sure that you have people that understand technology and understand IoT, understand the organization itself and how it functions, especially when we're looking at government. There's a different flow of things. And so making sure that you have a mix of people that are really good at the technology, are really good at working within a government framework really fast, understanding the people aspect of it too. And then from a design thinking perspective, it helps having had people that have taken the training, especially the certification. And then having seen at least one application of design thinking from an end-to-end perspective. I love interjecting aspects of design thinking into as many places as possible, but to do it end-to-end provides a lot more experience and understanding of how helpful it is applying it end-to-end.
Yeah, so I would concur with all of that. And in fact, I would pick up on something you said about having different types of skills. I think diversity is really important. And, I'm a technology guy. And at one point in my career, very early, I thought, technology is this and law is this and society is that. And they're all separated. So it doesn't matter what I do in technology. But I no longer think that. And I haven't thought that for a while because they're all very interconnected. Society and technology are a duality. They interact, they influence how they move forward together or separately. And so it's very important to have that diversity of viewpoints and skills in any kind of innovation space.
Okay, thanks. We have a couple more questions. I think we have time for 2, maybe 3 more. So if we didn't answer your question, we can follow up over email though. Given the security aspects, what would be the relationship or potential link to the public provision of open data and information? 2-part question. Also, what could this open data be used to inform or create?
Well, in terms of what could it create, I think there's so many possibilities and options that we haven't even thought of.
Yeah, I think open data, and I'm reading between the lines, is open data about our infrastructure, our city, what they're doing about government. But I'll take it from the IoT perspective in terms of open data about our physical world. Well, that certainly has lots of applications. It can help make our lives more efficient. We know what's going on whether there's traffic jams or not, what the weather is, we already know that. So the implications are huge. And with increasing IoT deployment, it's going to get even better or worse, depending on your perspective. The world around us, represented by that data, is going to be more animated. And at some point, you won't know the difference whether you're talking with a real human or some twin of a physical object that you're dealing with. So it has big implications. At the same time, as we already mentioned, because you are in that environment, you are susceptible to being monitored. It has privacy implication. And this is where the government, in my view, has to step in and have some clear guidelines, some clear laws around that. It's a big, just very lightly explored field, and that IoT is just going to make it more important and more pressing to address.
Yeah, that's great, Walter. That's awesome.
Okay, thanks. Let's do one more. What industry standards are in place to ensure, okay, maybe two more. What industry standards are in place to ensure that IoT infrastructure avoids the same pitfall with EV charging stations that are not interoperable?
Right. So if you don't mind, I'll take that just to begin with. IoT, as you've seen, is a huge space, right? So there's all kinds of potential silos. And as a result, many of the standards are geared towards addressing specific aspect of IoT. So there isn't any one specific standard. And so when you ask about what standards are available, you really have to, at this point, narrow it down to IoT standard in home automation or IoT standard in autonomous vehicles. There is some activity going on in trying to develop models that will emulate all types of objects, but that's still at its infancy and it's not widely deployed. Luckily, there are some industry consortia that are addressing IoT standards for specific areas. But again, there is no one overriding IoT standards, as you might expect for some narrowly defined technology.
Yeah, I think this is something that we've been struggling with different technologies decade over decade. I know in Canada, we've been fortunate in the banking system where there is only one bank thing, like the machine for the point of sale. But I know in other countries, like for example, when I went to visit Turkey, all the even small vendors would have like this lineup of the bank point of, it's not the point of sale ones, but the ones to take your credit card transactions. So they had like 8 to 10 in the small mom and pop shop in order to be able to make sure that transactions go through. And so I think this problem has been happening for a long time. I think, especially with the EV charging stations too, I don't think there have been standards set to start out with. So then you end up with this bag full of adapters, hoping that they will work for whatever location that you're at. But for IoT, having governments get in there and start considering what standards they can set, I think that's a really great start. But some of this technology has been around for a while. So for some of it, I think the industry is going to figure it out on its own. And it's so funny, as we were prepping for this webinar, Walter and I were talking about how many connectors we have in our home. And it's just, it's a little bit of a pain that we have to deal with as technologies mature.
Right. And just to conclude on that, this whole situation about the standard just goes to show you that IoT is kind of at a systemic paradigm level, and that anyone developing standards within a certain government area or industry area really should rise above that and understand IoT better, so they can get learnings from other areas and also make sure that they are compatible with other areas where certain standards are being developed. So basically, an object in one area is an object in another, and an object in another in a virtual space. And there's no need to reinvent how you define an object in different areas, whether it's transport or industry or precision agriculture or whatever. So it just tells you that it's very important to elevate your digital literacy to understand the breadth of it as opposed to a narrow silo.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're at about time for today. So I think we're going to wrap up. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up with you over email. Before we sign off, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today and thank Nilofer and Walter for putting on today's session. I know they put a lot of prep into it. It is a pretty intensive topic. So we've shared a lot of resources today. Again, we're going to share them with you all in the email next week when you get the link to the on-demand recording of this. Between now and then, if you're looking for more information, you should check out Walter and Nilofer on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn. They're both pretty prolific tweeters. So they're constantly sharing thought leadership that I'm sure you'll find valuable. The YouTube channel for Spring 2, Praxima, I believe, has one as well. Both also have a lot of information. And you can always visit spring2innovation.com. We shared a link to an upcoming course we have focusing on digital literacy, leveraging IoT or through IoT and design thinking. So that's in the chat box. We'll share it again next week as well. And finally, we would really appreciate it if you could fill out our survey, which we'll be sharing with you shortly. We read every comment and we really do our best to implement any feedback you guys have. So if you can share it with us, that would be great. But I think that's about it. So thank you all for joining and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.